Hi and welcome back to the channel. Time for another conversation and with another special guest. Extremely special, and I'll not waste any time trying to introduce him because, I mean, he's incredibly famous in my house and maybe soon will be yours. Take it away.
That's an introduction. That's I think a little bit boosts what I am. I'm Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films. You can find me on YouTube, strangely enough. And Chris has been kind enough to let me onto his show to talk about something that's perhaps not films, even though some of them are film related. But
do you know, I thought that as well. We're giving the game away, but there was a time not that long ago that there was a Solitary Ronin music channel, and there
was.
It went out in a blaze of glory with the top 150 albums of all time or something, yes. And then that was the sole content. But we thought we'd resurrect some of that good feeling and some of that great film recommendation, or music recommendations, should I say. We can do both. This is the way that it goes. Yeah. And we're going to talk through Ronin's top 10, we're saying influential albums rather than favourite albums.
Yeah, it's kind of albums that shaped musical journey, to sound pretentious, but those kind of landmark albums that kind of made you go, hang on a second, what's going on here? I must investigate.
Yeah, the things that either punctuated events in your life, or as you say, you were listening to them and went, well, this is different, or this reshapes and then subsequently changed what you listen to for the next 5, 10, 20, however many years that there is. So objectively, I would say a lot of mine definitely are not the best albums I've ever heard. In fact, they definitely don't fall in there.
This is not necessarily a top 10.
Yeah.
Even though some of them probably would be, but this is more a bookmark album, if you will.
So Ronin's going to do 10, I'm going to do 5, and in typical, list terms for me, I have about 20 options to pick from when I come from my 5, and I suspect you're much the same.
Honourable mentions.
Honourable mentions. We can pull a couple of those together at the end. So I'll let you go. Have you ordered these in any order, or?
Yeah, I've kind of ordered them chronologically from deep in the past.
Okay.
Up to relatively new. It's still probably like 15 years ago.
I was going to say, we don't do necessarily very new. I think my most recent album is about... No, I actually have one from about 3 years ago, and then the next one before that's about 20. So we're good.
Yeah, I think my most recent's 2001.
Oh, okay. Dead on. Well, you rock on and go first.
Well, in my house, music was kind of in the background, and it was mainly kind of classical music, but Elvis, bizarrely, the Stylistics. If you remember the Stylistics.
I do indeed.
But growing up, it wasn't until I was maybe 10, 11, 12 where music became kind of important, because never trust anybody that doesn't like music and thinks it's only background. They're not to be trusted. They're probably
100%.
lizard people. But the first album I'm going to pick is The Works by Queen.
Interesting.
Because Queen were the first band that I pretty much went, this is different, and this needs to be investigated. And then very much with my film collecting, it's kind of, I need to see the whole career arc and get as much as I can. So I think I came in The Works, but obviously you went backwards in Queen 1, Queen 2, which might be my favourite Queen album.
Okay.
Sheer Heart Attack, News of the World, and then Night at the Opera, Day of the Races. But Queen were the first band that went, this is different, and this has to be investigated, and this has to be taken seriously. And Queen are a perfect example. Sadly, they're more popular since Freddie died than when Freddie was actually about, because people kind of forget they weren't ever that popular when they were actually making records. The critics thought they were way too smart. They never really got America, or America never really got them, because their albums were literally covered in 10 different styles of music. The critics couldn't pigeonhole them.
That's right.
So I think it is interesting with Queen how everybody thinks they were always popular, and they never really were when they were actually putting albums out.
Well, they were very and this seems to come very much from Freddie, that they were very much ideas generation. You know, there was very much somebody who said, let's do a song about this or in this style, or you know, that kind of stuff, and then they would work on that. Like famously, the disco song is Another One Bites the Dust, isn't it? It's the disco record. Which is not a disco record, obviously, at all, but you can see actually where the genesis of it came. They were very much that kind of, what I would say, music students or music studying students who say, right, this is my idea, this is what I'm going to do. Jazz is my favourite, by the way. I dearly love jazz.
Jazz is wonderful.
Yeah.
Mustafa, what an opener.
Well, it's mostly for Mustafa, actually. It's great because I think it's also my son's favourite as well, because went through a massive Queen phase. And I would start it off a night at the opera, without doubt, and obviously head blown off at 10 years of old by Bohemian Rhapsody. But then Mustafa in the car one day, I put it on, and I did the thing that you do with Mustafa, is that you turn it up really loud, so that when it starts really, really low and quiet, and they kind of go, this is interesting, and then it goes bang, but it's already at the optimum volume for that. That's great fun. What is it about the works?
Yeah, when was jazz? I was just going to say that's 79, because obviously the last track is more of that jazz. And like segues through the tracks that are on the album, and surely nobody's ever done that before.
Yeah.
It was almost doing a greatest hits of the album at the end of the album.
Well, but yet Queen were thought not to be an album band either. Do you know what I mean? That they didn't construct good albums, yet it's still well thought out. You know, It's one of those weird things. So yeah, particularly the works, it was just the first or the entry point then?
I think that was the entry point, because I mean, I'll be honest, I never really liked Radio Gaga until I was much older, and now you can't listen to Radio Gaga without a tear in your eye. But at the time, again, because of the production, it's perhaps not the best production. But then it's got Hammer to Fall, which is arguably their heaviest song.
Yeah.
And one of their best songs, period, and that's saying something. But for me, Queen are actually a band that the non-hits are actually their best songs. The hits are still fabulous, but their non-hits are, I mean, my favourite Queen song, 39.
Okay,
and Freddie doesn't even sing the main vocals in it. But it's just so much good stuff. Keep passing by open windows, which is about suicide. It's obviously a fantastic subject. And Hammer to Fall, and then is this the world we created right after it, which is a wonderful counterpoint.
It's interesting. I'll throw this out here, and we don't even need to discuss it, but I actually found when I was going through, my favourite albums, a lot of them seem to be favourite albums or important albums because they have a run of songs. You know, the 3 or 4 in a row that, while lots of albums have great songs punctuated through, a lot of my favourite albums have this run of 3 or 4 songs that kind of fits together in my head. And it was obviously someday when I was listening to those 3 or 4 songs in a row that I went, holy shit.
Yeah.
What the craft here, the emotion that is just carried through here, the roller coaster that they're taking you on, fabulous. And you've just alluded to that in some way.
Again, you could be old-fashioned and say back then bands cared about the flow of albums, whereas today, perhaps because of downloads and people just pick and choose songs, the actual flow of an album doesn't really matter as much as it used to, whereas people actually put lots of thought into how an album flows together.
But there was a lot of thought put into track 1, side 2, as much as there was the track 1, or side A, track 1. Whereas now, I don't think anybody thinks about that at all. It just happens to be track 6 on an album. Nice, so cool, interesting. I wasn't expecting that, I have to say.
Queen was pretty much my first important band.
That's interesting. Right, I'm gonna go next, because then you can go for a run on other ones. Now, our house, fun enough, stylistics etc. would have been. My dad was a Motown person,
right.
And the first album that I can really remember in the house was George Benson's Greatest Hits, and it was not strictly Motown or otherwise, but it was one of those back in the olden days. Young kids these days will not realise that you probably had one tape and you got another tape about 6 months later. That was just, there wasn't an access, or you taped stuff off the radio. Another novel concept.
Yes, that's a common thing.
Yeah, indeed. So my dad got George Benson's Greatest Hits one Christmas, and that was just the album that he just killed dead. But in the background, my dad had old albums from when he was younger, and there was a couple that he would have put up on a pedestal and said, like, "You're not ready for it. You're too young." He was absolutely correct about it. But someday you will come to realize that certain albums are in the stratosphere. Now, one of them is After the Gold Rush by Neil Young, right? Which I haven't picked, so that's why I've said it. But the prominent one for our entire family is, let me move that into place, is Joni Mitchell Blue.
Right.
Which, it's not a very novel choice. I mean, it's a well accepted kind of thing, but it's one of the few albums that both my mum and dad agree on. I think it was because they met in London in mid-70s or otherwise, and then became a couple, and that was like the soundtrack to theirs. But it again has a run of songs, especially to finish. Case of You into The Last Time I Saw Richard has that kind of thing that just settles the album down in this like melancholy kind of twee sweet kind of thing. But Joni Mitchell Blue is a stunning album. I think our first 5 albums are all stunning actually, but it's
I have to say I haven't heard any Joni Mitchell, which is bizarre.
This is fabulous. Yeah,
it is actually bizarre when I get to a later choice, and that later choice led to so many other singer-songwriters.
Yeah,
and really I should have got into Joni Mitchell a long time ago, but maybe this is the opportunity.
Well, isn't it interesting though, because obviously, like, probably Joni Mitchell wasn't the first in that line either. Somebody inspired Joni Mitchell, so it doesn't matter where you go along these kind of journeys. You hop on and off, and you start at one artist, and then you see the through line from there. But they were obviously inspired from early on. But Joni Mitchell, I think her first 5 albums are all fabulous, although sort of similar. I mean, I don't think there's an incredible amount of production in it. Change, you had Stephen Stills involved, etc. quite a lot at that time. And they all like a little close circle. If you've read Bob Dylan's biography Chronicle, you can see they were all kind of in and around the same place at the same time, and there was a lot of flow over those. But Joni Mitchell is our family album, if you want to say, that everybody in the family kind of gravitated to or had their time with or had their stage with going through.
Because just like films, I'm always looking for new music to listen to, which is ridiculous because I've got a lot of music, but like films.
Just like films. I can't watch the ones that are on my shelf, so I just need more that I have, so that I don't have to watch those. Music's exactly the same for me. So that's mine. Give us your next.
Good stuff. Well, we'll probably see a pattern for the first half of mine, because after Queen, I went heavier with Iron Maiden.
Okay.
Which, again, it's the progression from that signature Brian May sound. I mean, Brian May's signature guitar sound doesn't sound like anybody else because he played his guitar through a tiny little speaker which distorted it. But so next was Iron Maiden. Obviously, metal and hard rock is where my base is, even though I've spread out over the years. Because at one point, I wouldn't even imagine listening to something with a keyboard. But again, you get school friends and you get introduced to Maiden, and again, it was just another level of how are they making that noise. And apart from anything else, I mean, Peace of Mind is one of their, you could argue the first 7 Maiden albums are just about perfect.
Yeah.
They have an album run that's almost unparalleled. But the great thing about Maiden, they taught you about history, and they did To Tame a Land, which is about June. They did Aces High. They did Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Coleridge. So why go to school? Just listen to Iron Maiden albums all day. You'll learn so much. This has The Trooper, Where Eagles Dare, Flight of Icarus, Die With Your Boots On, Quest for Fire, which is really awful. But on the whole, I mean, these are next level. Power Slave.
Yeah.
And I think the guy who introduced me to them had like the whole slab of like the first 5. So I got introduced to the first 5 all at the same time. So it literally was a kind of sensory overload. But I still love Maiden to this day. Yes, they've had their fallow period. Yes, the last 20 years they're going more kind, not necessarily progressive, but they're doing kind of longer songs when they don't necessarily need to. But the classic Maiden, as we call it, is pretty much unparalleled. If you're into that kind of thing, also.
But see, this whole Maiden, actually, that whole 80s heavy rock phase is something, like I said, our house was very much a Motown house and a top 40 house. So every time I've tried to go back to Maiden, it's been as a much older person, and doing that, same as films, I kind of have this thing that, right, you start at the start and you make your way through, and I've only been able to do that with a couple of artists, like Dylan, like Bowie, people like that, you know, people that weren't really in our house. And so what I end up doing with Maiden is then picking out individual tracks like The Trooper or, you know, every other Maiden song's out of my head now. That's just the way it goes. So it is one of those. I was looking last night, actually, because my youngest is in this kind of, I want to listen to different things. You know, that kids have great access to music now, but they tend to get their inspiration from one place, whether that's TikTok or thing, and they get kind of the same kind of stuff thrown at them all the time. They're like, I'd like to step outside of this. I really liked the Queen phase, but I never really took that Queen phase anywhere. So they're going ahead. So we're actually looking at a couple of Maiden albums last night to kind of go and explore and away you go and look at it, etc. So
just the two guitar thing is just wonderful when they go together. The guitar solos in that classic period, you can almost hear every note. You know, Dave Murray and Adrian Smith, the guitar work is just fantastic. And obviously Bruce Dickinson coming in on Number of the Beast, his voice elevated. You know, Paul Di'Anno, the first vocalist, was good, but he kind of came from a kind of punky background, and obviously doesn't have the range that Bruce Dickinson does.
I was just going to say that, indeed.
So that elevated them, and they've always, fallow periods, but because again, I don't know whether every kid who gets into metal hears the same thing from their parents. Oh, it's just a phase, and you'll grow out of it.
Well, I get that. I get that. Yeah.
40 years later, and that's still the bedrock, really.
Yeah, I had that friend that introduced me to Master of the Puppets and Anthrax, etc. At that time, Slayer, and there was a couple of bands, so I definitely had my phase of that around the time, and I don't think it really stuck at the time. But anytime you get a phase, you get an appreciation for that music at that time, and you know what it is that people really like about it. Like I even have a EDM 90s dance phase in there somewhere, so I used to think, God, that's the biggest lot of tripe I've ever heard, but actually having went through that phase and been out clubbing and all that, I totally get what it is. I totally get what the attraction of that is, even though it's not something that I listen to now. You know, it's the way that kind of thing goes. Let's go for another one of yours then.
Well, this one actually kind of the next two go together, because at some point somebody gave me a cassette, an E90, that you would record things on. I know some people might not understand this, but that was
albums, the greatest thing. Like I have to say, if you were there at the time, it was just game changing.
Way to get new music, because again, no internet, folks. There was the Friday Night Rock Show with Tommy Vance, the Saturday Night Rock Show with Alan Freeman, which obviously used to record. But there was two albums on this cassette which blew my doors off. One was Master of Puppets. 1986 is a big year. And the other one is Rain and Blood by Slayer. You can look at that cover.
Could you think I'd set... I think I just set you up for this, because this was exactly the time that I came in.
Yeah, exactly. 1986 was a huge year. Again, it's that step up from the guitar sound in Queen, the guitar sound in Maiden, and then the guitar sound in thrash. When Metallica and Slayer and Megadeth and Anthrax, it was just completely different level. You had Metallica more compositionally structured. Slayer was just a bludgeon. It was only 29 minutes long, and you felt as though you'd just been dragged around a room. But there's just something about that. And again, because I'm a solitary Ronin, you know, metal does speak to a certain demographic, outsiders, misfits. That was right. Well, Misfits in our band, but love them too. But that just kind of speaks to you. And again, it was just, how are they making that noise? You know, Cliff Burton's bass, until you realised it was actually bass. Um, just mind-blowing albums. And again, it's kind of the fashion to bash Metallica now. I know they sold out, even though just about every band would swap what Metallica have in an instant.
Everybody wanted to be Metallica, or what had the success that Metallica had from being
Megadeth
a niche
tried
to that.
Do a Black album at least twice.
Yeah.
Everybody else did as well. But they forget back in that 83 to 88, they absolutely worshipped Metallica. And Metallica were the people's underground band because they didn't have any radio play because of the nature of the music. So it's kind of fashionable to slag Metallica off now, but people kind of forget how good they actually were in their peak.
But I think you can say that about a lot of bands. A lot of bands that did that kind of cross appeal, that crossover from the niche to the mainstream, the albums that generally do it are incredibly well crafted. It didn't happen by accident. You know, Black's a stunning album for what it is. I'm sure there are Metallica fans that think it's like the commercial album or whatever it is, but it's still an incredibly well put together piece of work.
It succeeded at what it was supposed to do.
Yeah, indeed.
And again, like I said, there's other bands that tried that formula and it just didn't work because the craft wasn't as good.
Exactly right. You know, you have to have talent. You have to have. You need time and you need luck and you need the odd hook every now and again as well, which you know the right hook at the right time kind of fits quite nicely. So that's interesting. Nice set up for them. The only thing I'll say, obviously Metallica very recently have come back to prominence again with Stranger Things, etc.
Yeah.
And it's sort of robbed me from my one metal period in my life. You know, the time in the albums that I enjoyed at the time, people just now assume when you talk about liking those albums, it's because of Stranger Things.
Yeah.
Guts me.
It's like we were there 40 years ago. It's like.
Well, funny. I was actually sitting in London recently in the World's End pub in London, and Master Puppets came on, and we're sitting talking, and everybody else at the table had seen Stranger Things. It had just come out and seen it, and I was like, oh no, there's my metal phase right there's my favourite Metallica song, and of course everybody at that table thinks it's because I've also just seen Stranger Things. I was like, no, but Battery and all, it's great on that album. Like, it's just it's fabulous.
That's another stuff. Crushing opener.
Oh, it is another. Oh, absolutely. It was actually Battery was the first song off that album. I know it is the first track, but it was the first one that I went back to all the time. So I went, there's energy here that it just.
Yeah, Battery is the first Metallica song I ever heard.
Yeah.
Of course, you've got the acoustic intro, so you think, oh yeah, that's and then it's just like, how are they making that noise?
Yeah.
I'm used to Maiden, and this is just a completely different.
Yeah, it's different sound altogether. Cool.
But I'll stop my metal progression for the next choice.
Oh god, I expected it to go. So. I expected it to go 8 or 9 deep. I've got to be honest.
Well, there's we'll get to
this one's there. Okay, so it's me next, and most of my musical journey kind of continued in that kind of top 40 pop, bit of Motown in the background until I was in a situation in school where you were in those kind of communal areas, and the older kids were playing their music, and you kind of had to sit along and listen. So in the art room, I suppose in school, because I was a big love sitting in the art room, chilling out, sitting in company, just playing my clay or whatever it was. And there was 2 albums that were played right around that time. There were the 2 hip albums at the time. So one was Pearl Jam 10,
right,
and the other one was Rage Against the Machine, Rage Against the Machine.
Yes.
And initially I thought Rage Against the Machine was just a couple of kids that were just a bit too angry. You know, Mum and Dad didn't give them lunch a few days, and they just wanted to give off a bit of steam. You know, maybe not that different from what I thought about Limp Bizkit or something, maybe a bit later. Yet, I think I was madly wrong about that. I think Rage Against the Machine's track after track of real craft. I mean, the star of it is the guitar playing and the sounds that came out of his guitar. That's their calling card without doubt. In fact, it was so good that he set up another bloody super band as it was. So good. But what aside from loving every track straight to finish, apart from, and this is the thing, I managed to get a tape copy.
Right.
So in the tape copy that I had, it messed up a bit at the second last song, Township Rebellion, and I didn't actually know what freedom sounded like for many years, because every time I would never get to the end of it in the art lesson because it was too long, and by the time I got home and listened to it, I was like, I only know bits of freedom this last song. So for years the tape screwed up. I thought the end of the album was about 4, 5, 6 minutes before it actually finished.
Yeah, I suppose maybe all of us only know bits of freedom.
Well, that's probably very true,
especially nowadays.
And
that's the thing, it's still relevant.
Yeah, and
sadly,
my other abiding memory, of course, is that a lot of people will have of that album is actually going to see The Matrix the first time, because again, wasn't aware the Wake Up was going to be the last song, and I had spent the previous 2 hours while enjoying The Matrix being a third wheel for a friend of mine on a first date with this girl who hadn't spoken for 2. They didn't speak before they went in. I was like, first dates in cinema are the worst idea, because it encourages you not to contact or speak or anything. But we got up to go, and I was like, oh my god. He gave me a look. She gave me a look to say, can we just go? And this has just been a car crash. And as we're walking out, Wake Up started, and I went, no, we're sitting the fuck back down. So that was
the front row.
And endured the torture of that, and yeah, and then subsequently, of course, it became a Christmas #1, which again, that popularity thing nearly ruined the whole damn thing for me. But no, Know Your Enemy is awesome.
Bizarrely, I didn't get them the first time.
Yep.
It was only till later I went back and really appreciated them. And then I was lucky enough to actually see Audioslave with Tom Morello on guitar, and even with Chris Cornell, who like we all missed terribly.
Yeah.
I was just watching Tom Morello, pretty much watching Tom Morello and what he was doing with his guitar.
And same thing, like, because, you know, as a live band, it's very much frontman centered. You know, he's the performer. He bounces about. He's a ton of energy. The hair's going, whatever. But even in the live, a lot of it just centers in his guitar playing and the very high style that he played it on. And with just the noises, nobody else made noises out of a guitar like that, and it was very very inspiring at the time to go, shit. There's a police siren noise, but it's just coming from that guitar, and it kind of fit that whole theme that they had probably throughout the
I just love the bit in the album where it says all noises are made by the guitar.
It's so good.
I think it was inspiring to kids who weren't maybe classically trained on guitar or didn't read music or whatever, and you can just go ahead and just do what you like and do what you feel.
It was that whole it was that whole phase, and it was the Nirvana thing, you know, the not trained musician either, didn't really know chords, but liked the sounds that they could make while just pissing about. And for those of us that were classically trained or otherwise, it just pissed me off, to be honest, because I work fucking hard at this and thing, but you know, the craft that comes out of it is something else, you know. And like I say, your initial perception of this is trash to change into actually this is not quite trash is a nice journey to go on.
Yeah, because one memory of that Audioslave gig was actually they played Killing in the Name Of.
Oh, right.
The place just went absolutely nuts. Bananas, it seemed like 3,000 other people came from off the streets and like rushed in because they were playing Killing in the Name Of. I mean, the air just went like that. It was just...
I love those periods in concerts, or even in support acts. Sometimes you used to get support acts that were nobodies, but they had one hit song. Yeah. And everybody talked over them for the first 3 or 4 songs, and then to play the hit song, and the whole place would just lift.
Yes,
it's just
out in the front.
Oh, it's ridiculous. Yeah, right. That's my choice. Next for yours.
That's a good choice. So, like I say, this is a bit of a change in musical direction, because I am a mediocre poet, 12 books and counting. When I came across this, it pretty much was a life changer. Songs of Love and Hate, which has Avalanche, Last Year's Man, Dress Rehearsal Rag, Diamonds in the Mine, Love Calls You by Name, Famous Blue Raincoat, of course, which might be one of the greatest songs ever written. Sing Another Song Boys and Joan of Arc, the finest artistic work on Joan of Arc. Obviously, Bresson fans and
Dreyer fans
might disagree. Yeah, just the fact that Cohen would write like 100 verses through songs and like whittle them down. And again, people kind of went, "Oh, it's just for people who want to commit suicide, listen to his stuff." And people go, "Oh, his voice is terrible." But if you actually listen to covers albums, nobody can do it properly, really. So for all the critics of his voice just suited his words so perfectly. And again, Leonard Cohen led me to Bob Dylan and Neil Young and Tom Waits and Townes Van Sant and Warren Zevon and just all that, but not Joni Mitchell, bizarrely, but I'll address that.
You have just taken the point I was going to make. That you'd made there about his vocal style or his vocal quality, because I think you find that you could throw Bowie in this as well. Not a great vocalist in any way, shape, or form, but the individualness of their voices just can't be replicated in any way. Yeah. Like Neil Young is ostensibly a terrible singer, but his songs only work with him singing it, and it's that connection between the songwriter and the song itself. Those two things, when they marry together in a good way, you just can't do with anything else. There's no shortcut to that.
Yeah, and for me, obviously, I'm biased, but he never made a bad album. Even up to his death, and the posthumous album that was released by his son, it's just absolutely fantastic. And yeah, it's kind of game-changing and life-changing to hear that proper poetry, because obviously he was a proper poet. And he just kind of they just initially wrote songs just for a laugh. But his stuff's just amazing.
But genius. And another one of those artists that just had a career that just lasted forever. You know, there's just so much stuff, and to be consistently that good, or consistently produce stuff at a level, and that other part that you just said, you know, I may be biased or otherwise, but when you connect with an artist, doesn't matter whether it's a director, a musician, you know, anybody, it kind of doesn't matter what they produce, because you've already made that connection with their style and their voice, and in some way, and what they're going to try and tell you. Interesting.
And again, very much like films, there'll be some musicians you're into, and other people just don't understand it or don't get it, and it's absolutely fine, because they'll be the opposite way around. And Leonard Cohen is obviously not everybody's cup of tea, but if you like that taste of tea, it's wonderful.
Well, I was going to let you do another one, but I'm going to use that point to talk about my next artist, because again, it's a Marmite one, somebody who I consider to be an utter genius, but others, including my wife, that go, "Can you please turn that off?" That I cannot disassociate how mental it is. So again, going through, there was that lovely period of the 90s where you had the Britpop, etc., that was happening over there, and everything sounded the same, and they were definitely doing this copycat phase. And then we had this really interesting stuff that was going on between Portishead, Tricky, you know, Left Field, all of that kind of stuff was going. That was really, Massive Attack was all really interesting. And then you had this void in the middle where nothing really seemed to be happening. Everything was either one of those two things. And yet along came this weird and wonderful artist from Iceland called Bjork.
Yep.
And Debut came along. And again, putting it on initially and going, what is this? This is none of these things in some way, even though it was produced by David Arnold or otherwise. And sort of should have fitted more in the... Maybe it did fill a bit more in the Left Field Massive Attack cap, but there was saxophones, there was harmonies, it was just madcap. And even I think back to her Unplugged set that she did for MTV, if you've ever seen it. You haven't seen it, so she does the whole thing pretty much with glasses with bits of water on them. So she does the thing just going around with rubbing the edges of glasses. You're like, this is insane. How... Even conceptually to even try it, even if she didn't set it up herself, even if she didn't do any of that, there was still a creative choice there to say, right, we're not gonna do this, we're gonna do the glasses. And you go, what the hell? And that album just blew my socks off at the time. I just couldn't get over how exciting it was that somebody was doing really diverse stuff within an album. I think that was the bit that really got, you know, obviously there's a disco feel to some of the hits, you know, Big Time Sensuality has that, you know, that kind of feel yet, and then like Somebody in Love, and even the one where she locks herself in the toilet and she has a conversation in the Modern Life. And the whole thing's just bizarre, and it blew my socks off. And while I actually think the next album is better than it. You know, maybe even Vespertine's better than it. If it wasn't for me discovering that the first time, I think things would have been very different in terms of my musical journey.
Yeah, I mean, I've only heard the bare minimum from Bjork, so that might be another one to investigate. Because obviously I do have some non-mainstreamy things, well, mostly non-mainstreamy things. So.
Yeah, our later stuff is properly weird. Like, even it stretches my my ability to connect with it, I have to say, as much of a fan as they are, but I do appreciate just how different she is and how she doesn't really conform. Like, if you think of Dancer in the Dark, actually, the theme song, the soundtrack to that is also brilliant. Like, it's I've lost that album somewhere, or at least it might be out of the sleeve, might be just in the CD that I have, but it's brilliant as well. So yeah, that's Bjork debut is my next choice.
I might have to investigate that as well. Which is
bad influence.
Some of the point of this exercise.
Yeah, indeed.
Just like films. So I'm going to take another turn in musical direction, because in the early 90s, not early 90s, late 80s really, somebody else introduced me to rap. Not hip hop, because I don't like calling it hip hop, because that's nice and cuddly and safe. This is rap. Early 90s rap for me is the golden period, where it was less about cars and women and gold. And so the album I'm going to choose is Paris, The Devil Made Me Do It.
Right.
Good old Oakland boy. He's made some spectacular albums like Sonic Jihad, which is 747 flying into the White House, which got banned for some reason. Sleeping with the Enemy, which has the wonderful track Bush Killer, which worked for George Bush Sr. and George Bush Jr. And if Jeb Bush ever gets in the White House, it'll work for that as well. So 3 generations he'll get out of that song. Just again, angry. The way rap is supposed to be in my mind. It's actually political. It's about something rather than just see how many cars I've got.
Crystal, hose, all of that kind of stuff that it's just become. It's been about capitalists kind of showing off what I have.
Yeah, so it was more that kind of stuff. Jerry the Damager, Third Base. It was more that side of rap in that golden period. I did get House of Pain as well, obviously. Everlast has actually become a strange kind of, not country star, but he actually just plays an acoustic guitar now after his massive heart attack that he had when he left House of Pain. But Paris is just phenomenal. And again, that just led me into another area of music, because again, at one point it would just be guitars, bass, drums, that's it. But obviously you do kind of progress. So a little bit of rap in the early 90s.
Yeah, I don't know Paris at all. I was very much of the Illmatic, Stillmatic, Nas, KRS-One, East Coast. I'm trying to think who else was around that time, but yeah, there was just the political message that came along there. It was very much, it was about inequality. It was about, we're repressed. Will somebody please listen to us? This is our voice.
Yeah.
That kind of thing going on. Even Tupac, All Eyes on Me.
The Goats were really good. They only did 2 albums. Blood of Abraham are really good. They only did 2 albums. The Lynch Mob are really good. They only did 2 albums. So not a lot of production from some of them. Digital Underground, again from Oakland. Digital Underground are really good. Sons of the Pea was kind of one of those early albums as well. Body Hat Syndrome.
There was the quality of artistry, I think. I mean, this sounds like old man talking here for sure. I think it's decreased. In the I'm sure there is a element that is still doing things correct. Like I would say somebody like Zappa of modern music. I think Zappa from Chicago is phenomenal. Again, there's like an almost like jazz style undertone to what he's doing, and he's taught his first album, Care For Me, if you ever listen to it, is very much about the death of a friend, and there's a soulfulness to that, and there's a message in that, and it's about companionship and brothership and all of those things. But they don't make them like they used to.
No, I've kind of lost touch were at for the last 20 years, to be honest. Again, that kind of early 90s period was kind of the golden period for me, at least.
Well, that's as soon as the Roots became a backing band for a chat show, I think that was pretty much it dead for me. I was still am a big Roots fan.
In those days, you would actually hear the DJ cutting wax,
Indeed.
as the term is, whereas where do you hear that in today's urban hip hop? It doesn't exist really.
Scratching doesn't exist. None of that stuff.
Yeah, it was about skills.
Yeah. Oh dear, morose as we look back at the good old days. Yeah, indeed. Cool. We'll go for another one then. What are we on there? Have you done 5 or?
I've done 6.
6, 5 or 6. Go for another one. I've done 3.
Well, this one has got a slight film hint. It was 1995. If you remember a film called Seven.
Yes, I do.
And if you remember the opening titles of the film Seven, that kind of piqued my interest in a band that I'd seen a video for before, one of their early albums. But that opening title sequence intrigued me enough, and I'm glad I did. To Nine Inch Nails and the Downward Spiral.
I was having trouble there for a second, going 7 opening track. I thought it was going to be something different, and I went, well, of course,
and
Nine Inch
Nails. This is
Nails.
actually linked to my next choice, but I'll let you go first. But yeah, Nine Inch Nails, essentially Trent Reznor and a group of touring musicians. Trent Reznor is pretty much a genius, I think.
Oh yeah.
As far as his layering of songs, the fact that he is the best at doing remixes. How many remixes do you listen to? And it's just we've added a couple of beats.
Yeah.
We've done it acoustically, whereas Reznor would deconstruct the whole song and kind of reconstruct it, or just focus on a passage of a song and make a completely new song out of it. Unfortunately, I've got like this much Nine Inch Nails stuff because it's all like remix albums and stuff like that. But that's one of the few artists that the remixes are actually worth listening to because they're generally completely different. So I went back to Pretty Hate Machine, which Head Like a Hole was the song that I'd seen the video of, which seems strange. But again, a band that even like 8 years earlier, I would never have considered just because of there's like beats and there's like keyboards and there's. But the Downward Spiral is still difficult and challenging and quite brilliant. Obviously, Hurt has now almost become more famous for Johnny Cash than actually Trent Reznor, which he doesn't seem that bothered about, to be fair. Closer is one of the truly transgressive songs in, I'd say, popular music history, but certainly one of them. And obviously, he's now morphed into Atticus Ross, the soundtracks. I mean, I've got the soundtracks of films I haven't even seen, but because it's Trent Reznor, I've got the soundtracks. So Nine Inch Nails, and again, we'll go on to my next choice. That's led on to that as well. So there's a slight filmic tie with those, because I actually saw Seven in the cinema when I used to go to the cinema, and that initial, what's that? That's really quite interesting.
Yeah. Yet Nine Inch Nails never crossed over to the UK at all, right? In any kind of main form at all. Like they were kind of, if it wasn't for MTV, I think because it seemed to carry certain artists from America to popular culture here, but without ever really charting or doing anything. Yeah. Interesting. There's another show, top film composers.
Yeah, well, if I ever get around to doing my Mount Rushmore, that was going to be one of the episodes.
Oh dear, spoilers.
Film composers, spoilers. But considering I've been thinking about that for 2 years, and it's not actually happened yet.
I've 2 left.
And obviously he did the soundtrack to Soul.
He did. I was going to say Soul. Yeah.
Pixar, because that piano bit at the end is so Trent Reznor. It's unbelievable.
I'm caught actually because I really enjoyed the music of Soul much more than I enjoyed the film. I think the film's okay. It's quite good, etc. But it has that 2 soundtrack problem. You've got the Trent Reznor version, and then they have the John Cope. Can't remember his name. The guy that done the other bit as well. So I bought neither because that's the only solution. Yeah. Right. Let's go for. So many choices. It's
Yes.
one of those. I was going to go for somebody that you might talk about in a while, so I might leave it. And if you don't mention it, then we'll come back around. So I'll go for this one. This was probably stepping back a little bit. Ever be somewhere and you get offered tickets for a show and you're like, I've never heard of that artist before. Somebody saying, I've got tickets for whatever and I can't go. Do you want to go? And you go, right, well, I mean, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'm not doing anything tonight kind of thing. So I'm in my early 20s or something around that anyway. Somebody had given me tickets for this new band that had just come over from America. And I knew nothing about it and went and kind of tried to listen to a few of their songs, try and find a few of the songs, and went, oh, right, okay, that's quite good. Now, the band was Counting Crows, and this is August and Everything After. But that show had about 50 people at it. And I actually think I love this album mostly because I get to watch a band that became very, very famous play in a pretty large venue with Adam Duritz just sitting in a speaker for most of the time, singing as if he was in your front room.
Yeah, they're either the best gigs or the worst gigs.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
50-50.
I've seen it both ways. Absolutely, I've seen it like this. There's no atmosphere in here at all. Whereas this one was totally the opposite. It was like, sweet Jesus. There's like an energy here that isn't coming from the crowd. It's coming from basically one man on stage. You know, very much in a very dour, kind of depressed man. And I've subsequently seen it a couple of times since, and it was never quite the same, you know, that experience. We never could ever match up to it. But that was an album that I then took to uni with me, and then one of my best friends in uni, we basically bonded over the fact that we both loved this album.
Yeah.
He had a different favourite song than I did. It actually turned out that he'd convinced me that his favourite song was actually my favourite song, kind of thing. And that autobiographical nature of music is the reason why that kind of sticks with me.
Yeah, another band I haven't heard that much of.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first two albums are pretty great, and then after that, they fall into the trap that so many albums or artists of that ilk fall into. To make money, you make this album, and therefore you just rinse and repeat that again and again and again and again. The Coldplay effect, we'll call it. We'll call it in recent times, which is a real shame because I think early Coldplay, I think is actually quite interesting and thoughtful and all of those things that are there. But yeah, that's mine.
Okay. Well, like I said, Nine Inch Nails is related to this one because the music on the titles of Seven was a remix by this band. And through Trent Reznor, I got into this band, and that band is Coil. This is Unnatural History Part 2, Smiling in the Face of Perversity, which I think is a fantastic title.
Mm-hmm.
And this also has a film theme, because this is the album that contains the original Hellraiser theme. It's 6 tracks that were originally going to be on Hellraiser, but Clive Barker thought they were too scary, or would take the viewer out of the actual film, and they went for Christopher Young's more orchestral, which I do like. It's a kind of elegant. But these Hellraiser themes by Coil are scary. Coil is pretty much 2 blokes, and again, who are both sadly no longer with us, but again, it's electronic music that I wouldn't imagine listening to 10 years earlier. It's can have drones when there are lyrics. Sometimes it's kind of just spoken. They have one called Something, and it's literally John Ballen saying something, 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 and it just gets louder and louder and louder. They've got 2 albums, Music to Play in the Dark, volumes 1 and 2, and that's the best place to listen to Coil, in the dark or in headphones. You probably will have nightmares. But they're just so unusual. They have lots of albums and different versions of albums. They're quite hard to get and they're pretty expensive. They have albums of like drones. There's one called Time Machines, which I don't know whether you can time travel, but certainly if you listen to it in the dark for long enough, you start seeing things. Again, a band that I just would not have been into or wouldn't even have heard of if you don't go down the rabbit hole of one artist to another artist. Astral Disaster is fantastic. And they did the soundtrack to Derek Jarman's Angelic Conversation, and that's a wonderful album, and that has Judi Dench speaking Shakespeare sonnets over running water and bizarre drones, but it somehow works. So Coil, certainly not for everybody, but I would highly recommend it if you're into kind of more experimental stuff.
So that's really interesting. So for me, from listening to your description, it falls very much into the category of the idea that music can be anything. Do you know what I mean? Or it can be as long as it's got craft to it, or somebody, and if somebody convinces you of it once in one album, you keep on going to look for it. I suppose for me, it's the Bjork effect of I'd seen the craft in the first couple of albums. I'll always listen to music because there's a chance that I'll if I invest the time and energy into it, I'll get actually a lot out of it.
Yeah, I mean, some of their stuff isn't good, to be honest, but stuff that is really good is really good. But you can't put your finger on it because, like I say, he generally just speaks a lot of the time. Singing doesn't really happen, and if it does, again, he's not a singer. But it's kind of fascinating because it works, but very much like film, you can't really explain why or how. But they're well worth a rabbit hole, but it is a very strange rabbit hole.
Fits quite nicely with a video I'm thinking about doing. That's that you've probably seen. Roger Kirby did a video on the importance of art. That he done. I'm gonna trying to do a response video, but this kind of artist fits into that. What you get out of it is more than a sum of its parts. The things that are put into it and way you interpret it, etc. And I think that as an idea is interesting.
Sorry, they have one called Broccoli, and it's pretty much, you need to eat your greens and you need to eat your broccoli, but it's actually quite a moving song about parents.
Okay.
But it's like, I have no idea why.
Yeah.
But it's very strange, but strange.
That's the question that I think about quite a lot because my wife and I are very different on opposite ends of the scale. And I think I know your answer. I think most people are either a predominantly music fan because of the lyrics or from the music. Like, do you derive your meaning from the song from the lyrics or the tone and timbre of the music?
Probably the lyrics first.
And I was going to say, the Leonard Cohen is the one.
Yeah, because that's why, I'm a metal fan, but I've never get into death metal that much. I've never get into black metal because vocally you can't really hear what's going on. And for me, even though you can read the lyrics, but for me, lyrics are a really important thing. So that's why there is a kind of line of metal that I'm not really interested in crossing because it's just grunts, which is fine if you like that. But for me, I think lyrical content is too valuable. Yeah.
Whereas I'm on the opposite end of this spectrum. It's something I didn't find out until much later in my life, and the kind of thing where, I'd say, God, that's the most heartbreaking song, and my wife will go, but it's not about heartbreak, it's about this kind of thing. And I said, but no, at the core of it, it feels heartbreaking, and it's just it's something that pops into my head all the time.
Yeah, because I know people who are big music fans, but say they don't pay attention to the lyrics.
Yeah. Hardly at all. I mean, there's certain combinations of words that obviously flow together nicely, but evoke a different image in my head than what the artist ever intended in any way, shape, or form. So I think it's really interesting, and definitely, even when I used to play, it was the vibe that I used to get of that flowing into that was the bit that get the emotional response out of me, necessarily than the lyrics, and even in the rubbish stuff that I've ever written, lyrics are hard.
Yeah.
Mainly because I think it's really obvious what I'm saying, and of course when I've played it for other people, they haven't got a clue. I mean, it is obtuse enough that they really don't know, but in my head...
My awful poetry is testament to that.
Maybe it's brilliant, it just hasn't got an audience yet.
Yeah.
That's an audience
Stay
thing.
Positive. Stay positive.
Right, so you've two to go. You go, and then we'll do our last two one after each other. Yeah, go for it.
Well, again, something a little bit different, well, completely different coil. But again, it's a side of my musical taste. It's the Staple Singers. And Beatitude. I think I've got about 20 Staple Singers albums.
Wow.
They're just so good. Again, I'm not religious, and they do obviously religious stuff.
They come from that.
Yeah, isn't amongst my favourite of their songs, obviously. But again, I think Mavis Staples is perhaps the only one left, maybe Purvis. Sadly, no more Pops. But they've just got a heart, and it's easy to get emotionally attached to them.
Yeah.
If you've seen the documentary about Mavis Staples, I mean, she's just amazing. And musically, they're just fantastic. Again, from the gospel background.
Yeah.
And again, I'm a big Parliament Funkadelic. The Meters, the Crusaders, just all that instrumental stuff. And the Staple Singers, if you're having a bad day, you can put on a Staple Singers album and your problems will go away, because they just make you feel good, and you can't really put a kind of value in that.
Well, it's called soul for a reason, I think. It's either sink down into it or raise yourself up out of it. It'll take you in. And I feel exactly the same about that type of music. If I am in a funk or I'm needing something, that's the type of music that'll lift me out of it. There's a I was gonna say there's a record label at the moment called Coal Mine Records that specializes in modern soul music. That's definitely inspired from that oeuvre. From Stax, from that kind of label, but they're based out of Ohio, and it's a lot of white boys in general, but they definitely have that spirit and that soul of that era in a modern twist. And so somebody like Black Pumas kind of is like a modern version of that, if you want to go find that in his album Colours.
I was just going to say they have an album called The Staple Swingers, and the front cover is them on swings.
On swings. I was going to say, I think I've seen it.
Album covers of all time.
I have a couple of Mavis Staple solo albums, I think, in there. It's just fabulous. Just really brilliant.
Amazing. Again, go check out the documentary about her, because that is wonderful.
Awesome. Right, I'll do one more, and this is my one modern. I mean, everything else is just not modern at all, so I'll just have to forget about that. But this is a modern one, and this is one that I found. It was a very popular album, I think, about 2 or 3 years ago, and then I didn't get into it, and then I picked it up one day. It was kind of on the background, something comes on, suggested songs after something else is played, and you go, and it just instantly just rings to your ear, and you go, ooh, that's it. So this one is it's an artist or a band, but it's really just her, called Snail Mail.
Okay.
Right, she's 2 albums through. This is a debut album, Lush, and she's got one called Valentine that follows on afterwards. I think Lush is just superlative compared to the second album's good. Yeah. If you like the guitars, it took me a long time to place what it is I love about the guitar sound. It's like the clean guitar sound of a band like Band of Horses, if you know who Band of Horses are. It's a very, very clean guitar sound, and the bass, and her voice. And she just always strikes me as that kid in school that everybody thought was weird.
Right.
But it's actually incredible. Just this person that's actually way ahead of their peers in a lot of ways, like has himself figured out, kind of just trusts himself, does what they like to do, and just has the most soulful, like this indie alternative girl with a guitar sound. There's just something about it that really connects with me. And again, that run of 3 songs from Pristine, Speaking Terms, and Heatwave, tracks 2 and 3 and 4 are just I blow my mind that a girl as young as her has that kind of insight, soul, thought, progression, all that kind of stuff. I can't recommend it highly enough. I was in Waterstones a couple of months ago. And Waterstones is one of those places, or certainly the one that I was in, that has, the crap covers of popular songs kind of things. And there's this crap cover in the background, you're going, what is that? Because it's not of it. And it was one of her songs, and I went, well, this is utterly bizarre, because that is not a famous artist. It's not a thing. I just turned around to Madonna and went, that's Snail Mail. That's utterly bizarre. But yeah, can't recommend it hard enough, and especially if I know you the likes of Julian Baker and Phoebe Bridgers. She's definitely of that ilk, while just totally having her own sound. She's fabulous.
St. Vincent as well.
Oh, St. Vincent's another one. Yeah, incredible. You know, that kind of modern female artist that is totally knows who they are. You know, I think that's something that's incredibly powerful in terms of songwriting terms.
Yeah, I mean, there is good stuff out there.
Absolutely.
It's just like films. There's still good stuff out there, even though we are in the 21st century.
Yeah. It's just hard for old fogies like us to find it.
So I'll finish with something from the 21st century as well. Granted, it's 2001, but that's as modern as I get. I do have modern music, honest. And it's Tool, Lateralis. This just absolutely blew me away when I heard it. I actually got to see them in 2006, which was pretty amazing. And obviously Tool led me to Maynard, the singer's other bands, Pucifer and A Perfect Circle, who are also wonderful, but in different ways. Just the journey you go on, the production, and the lyrical content, which is open to interpretation, which is the way Maynard likes it. Danny Carey, they don't call him the Octopus for no reason. He's just amazing. It's the only gig I've ever been to where I just watched the drummer. I mean, you're helped with the fact that Maynard stands in the shadows at the back. He's not a front man. And the way they use the bass, Justin Chancellor's bass is essentially another guitar. And every album they've made, granted they haven't made enough, but every album they made, it's so perfectly crafted. I mean, the bass player talked about, oh yeah, I've heard some people write a song in 5 minutes. That's not us. So they're like painstaking. They do, the three instrumentalists do the music, send it to Maynard, and then he puts lyrics to it or says it's rubbish. So it kind of takes a while, but the finished product is just mind-blowing, and they might actually be my favourite band of all time now. I think they might have actually overtaken Metallica, which is a bit of an achievement.
That's heavy.
It is, because their stuff's just, you get so much out of it every time you listen to it. And Lateralis, I think, is probably their most perfect album back to front, or front to back even. Or whichever way you want to listen to it. So that's Tool from 2001, Lateralis.
Cool. So that's your list of 10 albums.
Yeah.
10 albums done. So what are the 56 other honourable mentions?
Well, The Crusaders, Freeze the Wind. That's a fantastic album. If you want to check out the song Sweet and Sour, it's about 8.5 minutes. Joe Sample and are just on top form. Larry Carlton on guitar, who follows on to the next one because he played in Steely Dan's The Royal Scam, which is just a fantastic album. Kid Charlemagne and The Fez, and Tom Waits, The Black Rider was my first experience of Tom Waits in '92.
Well, funny, I was going to do that. That's the one I thought you might mention. Heart of Saturday Night, I think's superlative.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I went backwards from there. The Black Rider isn't one of his most accessible, but that was the first one that I bought, and it didn't put me off, so that must be good. Mars Volta, Deloused in the Comatorium. Mars Volta, who are actually back together and releasing a new album.
Yeah, I heard that. That's right.
In a few weeks, which is going to be interesting. Again, they just blew the doors off. They were one of the most exciting bands. Yes, they got a little bit wanky at times with their let's have a little 30-second drone at the end of the song just because.
But you earn it. You know, that's what I would say.
Because somebody I know saw them and they played 3 hours. They had no support. They didn't speak to the audience. They just came on, played for 3 hours and left.
I've been at a few concerts like that, I have to say.
Frank Zappa, Overnight Sensation. I'm one of those strange Frank Zappa fans who actually like when he's a bit more controlled and he actually writes kind of normal songs. I know that's sacrilege. But sometimes he does get a little bit carried away. But again, the guy was a genius.
Yeah.
Operation Mindcrime by Queensryche. Just a perfect progressive metal album. St. Vincent, Marry Me was the first St. Vincent album I heard and just fell in love with Annie Clark. And Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, The Boatman's Call was the first album that I heard.
I was listening to it earlier on, actually. I was trying to introduce it to my son. I was like...
Yeah, I absolutely love Nick Cave.
And, again, another one of those artists. Not sure he can sing. Not sure he's... But, again, couldn't... His stuff wouldn't work. Can you imagine the Skeleton Tree done by a proper singer? I don't know. It just wouldn't work. None of it would be a thing.
The track in the Skeleton Tree when he has the Danish soprano come on, it's just like... Phenomenal. Get out of town.
Yeah.
Lou Reed's another one where Lou Reed is one of those people that has some of my favourite songs of all time.
Yeah.
And some of the worst songs I've ever heard in my life.
I would agree with that.
It's like,
indeed.
How did you get that on a record? It's awful.
Yeah,
he also has some of the most amazing songs.
I find Lou Reed an artist that I left and say I'm in the mood for some Lou Reed, and I take it halfway out of the thing, and then I go, but I'm not actually, not tonight, and then other times it fits perfectly, Yeah. Fabulous.
Coney Island Baby is just like an absolutely beautiful song, but then he just has terrible stuff.
I always think I was just about to say exactly the same thing. That's what happens when you mix genius with drugs, and don't have a filter to say actually I should have stopped there and continued on.
Because that's the amazing thing about Frank Zappa. Everybody assumes that he was on drugs, but he didn't do drugs. He was anti-drugs. He just liked beer. He just had a hell of an imagination, and he was a genius.
Do you know who can argue with that? We all need our vices, or otherwise.
Yeah. So, what are your honourable mentions?
Well, the couple more that I had, not as interesting. So I obviously had Tom Waits' Heart of Saturday Night. That our closing time is going to bring. I had Simon Garfunkel, Bridge Over Troubled Water. Oops, I do that. Although I was going to go for Graceland as well. That was another. I mean, I just think both are incredible. Bon Iver's for Emma Forever Ago. Bon Iver.
Not familiar with that.
Not familiar with Bon Iver. So Bon Iver is one of those artists that is... He just does whatever he wants. In some ways it comes off spectacular. In other ways it's just not. A bit... very acoustic-y, folky, a bit like Sufjan Stevens or something, and then has a couple of albums where he just does electronic-y stuff inside it. And actually, there's one of his albums, the one before last, that I thought, God, that didn't work at all. And then I was on YouTube and they'd recorded a live show of him playing in like a warehouse in New York, and I started watching it thinking, God, this album isn't very good, I don't really like it. And then I watched that live show for about 50 minutes and went, this completely works. In this setting and in this the way that he's put it together artistically, this is unreal. So that was my couple of finals. And then CDs wise, I only have two that I didn't talk about. My favourite album of all time, or not my favourite album, my favourite artist of all time, is a girl called Tina Dicko. She's a Danish girl, and she just writes simple, straightforward pop songs. So In the Red, that was her first UK release. She's the kind of artist. The reason I love her is every time I'm thinking to myself, God, songwriting is really hard. It's impossible. I can't do anything, because not that I release a whole lot of stuff, but I like to write. I just like to write sad, depressing music for me, for therapy, nearly speak.
Of course. And
sometimes you think, God, it's impossible. I'll listen to something by her, and it just becomes really clear what you should be trying to do. And they are just. They're pop songs of a way, but she has a haunting quality to her voice. It's very simply acoustic guitar, her voice, and away you go. And then the other one, the last one that I was going to talk about was 07. This is Simple Things. I went through a period of you just want to chill out. It was like the extension of the Portishead, Left Field, Massive Attack kind of thing. They were a bit more, I suppose, poppy, but again, it was one of those things that just flew in the background. But Tina Dicko did a couple of songs with 07 as well, so the two things were linked. So Sia and Tina Dicko did those ones.
Yeah,
and
not
then,
familiar with them either.
Oh, 07?
What have I been doing all my life?
Well, where were you? You were listening to Nine Inch Nails instead of the
last 40 years of my head's under a stone.
The middle of the road version of Nine Inch Nails there. And there were another couple that I could have grabbed. Things like Extreme were a very big band for me at the time. A band that I thought were one thing, and then I got an album by them and went, actually, that song More Than Words is about as unrepresentative of them of a band as you can probably have. Bizarrely, I could talk about this another time. We had, I don't know about you and family, but I have a family that it doesn't really seem like there's anybody in any extended family that's very like me, interest wise, anything like that.
Yep, same here.
And there was a second cousin, or my dad's cousin's mother, something like that, died, and she was getting buried. They lived over in England, and she was wanted to be buried here, so the whole family came across. They'd never met anybody, but one of their sons was into every band that I was into, but did the same things that I was into, looked a bit like me, and I was like, this is fucking bizarre. Yes. And we'd never met them. First night they were there, we went and stayed, went to a family party, and he'd brought a guitar and I brought my guitar, and the two of us just played Extreme songs all night for everybody, and it was like the first day of the rest of my life in some ways. I was like, okay, there's maybe something in this genetics and something in this kind of family kind of thing. So that made a big impression on me. But yeah, that's the list, and that's the show.
Anything you've discovered recently?
What was it? Well, I was listening to Boatman's Call actually earlier on that I was going for. Band of Horses have a new album out. I do love Band of Horses. Who else? I was listening to somebody the other day, and it's completely gone. Oh, Maggie Rogers' new album came out as well. I do like Maggie Rogers, another female singer-songwriter. Of that.
Write that down as well.
Yeah, her new album Surrender came out. And I would have said before that, I haven't heard anything recent or new in a very long time. What about yourself?
I recently made a discovery, which is bad because he's got 18 albums, which is always bad. But Damien Gerardo, who's from Seattle, he's probably in his 40s. Again, he's a singer-songwriter. So I've done well. I've only got 5 of his albums so far. I'm restraining myself. I'm trying to not.
What type of artist?
Get all 18. He's mostly kind of acoustic and kind of quiet, but wonderfully depressing.
Oh, I love it. It's my favourite type.
Yeah. So on this album, which is The Horizon Just Laughed, this is the best one out of the 5, I would say, so far. And the track Over Rainbows and Rainy Air in the Last Great Washington State, you can find them on YouTube. Really quite interesting and wonderful, but he's got 18 albums, which is always a bad sign.
But we do like a rabbit hole, let's be honest.
Yes.
And I probably should have mentioned Daniel Norgren. He's a Swedish singer-songwriter, again, very haunting-ish kind of person. N-O-R-G-R-E-N. I have a couple of his albums. I was meant to bring one of those. It's a never-ending train, as you know, to go like into. Films. So we could have done another top 10, another top 20. And maybe,
probably.
When this hits, right, we'll make a promise. When this hits 5,000 views, right?
yes, we'll do another one. Yeah.
We'll do another one.
Yes.
And we'll see if we can tempt people into maybe vehemently disagreeing with our musical tastes or vehemently agreeing. Whoever knows what way that goes. 10
albums that we were tempted by the cover. Because again, back then, you had to buy albums to find out what it was like.
What it sounded like.
No.
Well, actually, I'm more interested maybe 10 albums that you were tempted and bought for the cover, but actually you really disliked.
Yeah.
I can do that. I can do that quite easily too. What did I just buy, or the album that you bought that you initially hated but came back to love much later. There's plenty of those.
It's strange
as well.
now because obviously we can just with a click, I can find out all those artists that you talked about within like 5 minutes.
But
is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I'd say most, and the same goes for films actually, most things, self-discovery is where the fun is.
Yeah.
You can recommend to me a film, an artist, and in my head that'll always be Ronin suggesting to me the man's got good taste. But when you find something yourself and you own it a bit yourself, then you take personal ownership and you go, there's a special relationship now developed here with that, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So that's why you're 18. That's why you're going to end up with all 18 albums of
probably, yes,
of Mr. Gerardo.
Yep, no doubt.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. That was fun.
Thanks very much for having me on.
Let's hope it all recorded. Well, obviously if it's
Yes,
up, but
that's helpful.
it seems to be fine. But we'll have to do it again soon, and maybe talk
Certainly.
about some things maybe more familiar footing to us.
Yep, you never know.
Okay. Right. Thank you very much for watching.
Thanks
If you've
very
made it this far, take care. All the best. Bye.
Cheers.